Proportional relationships, lesson 6 notes. Finding the slope continued. Again, we're on the very last page of the notes where it was blank and you wrote down some examples for finding the slope. And I'm now on example number 3. Again, this is the very last page of the notes. If I scroll back, that's the very last page. We're on example 3. Okay, so I already said that 3, -7 is x1, y1, and -9, 2 is x2, y2. So I'm going to find my slope. So the slope equals y2, which is 2, minus, now we need to be careful. y1 is -7. For examples 1 and 2, those numbers were always positive. So it's just minus the number. But this time I have a negative. Don't put just 7 because that's 2 minus a positive number. I have to put 2 minus -7. On the bottom, we have x2, which is -9, minus x1, which is 3. Now, back in the very first lesson we did, or towards the very beginning of the year, we know that minus a negative actually becomes positive. So in other words, this is 2 plus 7 over -9 minus 3. If I put that in our calculator, 2 plus 7 over -9 minus 3, I get -3/4. Or I could have put the original problem in. 2 minus -7 over -9 minus 3. It doesn't matter which way you do it. In the end, I get -3/4 for both. So for example 3, my final answer is -3/4. So when I'm doing these, if I know I'm subtracting a negative, I immediately write the problem this way. I don't bother with minus a negative. I immediately change it to addition. But I noticed that some students struggle with that. So my suggestion would be to write it like this and just put it in the calculator like that. You don't have to change anything to positive if you don't want to. But again, if you see, oh, it's minus a negative, I know is positive, and you want to write it that way, I would accept it that way as well. Let's do another one like that. Example 4, 1, -6 is my x1, y1, -4, -12 is my x2, y2. So my slope equals y2, which is -12, minus y1, which is -6. x2 is -4, minus x1, which is 1. Or you could have started this as -12 plus 6 over -4 minus 1. So you could have had -12 plus 6 over -4 minus 1. Either one would be fine. All right, let's put that right into our calculator. Maybe. There we go. So I've got -12 minus -6 over -4 minus 1, which is 6/5. So this equals 6/5. So my final answer for example 4, slope equals 6/5. Now again, you could write it as minus the negative. You could change it as the positive. You could write it as minus the negative and then, put the plus signs like that. I don't care which way you do it, as long as you're getting the correct answer in the end. That is what matters. All forms would be acceptable. You could write it like, oops, keep doing that. You could write it like this. You could immediately write it like that. Or you could write it like that and change it to addition. I don't care, as long as you're getting the correct answer in the end. However, one way to think of this is when you're subtracting a number, it's x or y2 minus y1, and then x2 minus y or x1. When you're subtracting that, it's like taking the opposite of it. So another way of thinking the slope is y2 and then the opposite of y1, x2 and then the opposite of x1. Pause your video, write that down. Okay, so let's do an example, what I mean, to show you what I mean. So let's use -3, -2, -9, -16. So we'll call this x1, y1, x2, y2. So my slope will equal y2, which is -16, and then put the opposite of y1. Well, what is the opposite of -2? The opposite of -2 is +2. And then it would be x2, which is -9. And then the opposite of x1. Well, the opposite of -3 is +3. So again, this is the opposite of this. This is the opposite of that. Put that in my calculator. -16 plus 2 over -9 plus 3. And I get 7/3. So again, for my final example, slope equals 7/3. All right, so I know I threw a lot of different ways of doing this at you in those last 3 examples there, but you can decide which way is best for you. All right, the original formula is y2 minus y1 over x2 minus x1. But that subtraction could also be thought of as the opposite of. Whatever you need to do to make sure you get the correct answer, that's what matters, all right? So you do it the way that you best understand. If you have any questions on the examples on the back of the notes, let me know.